All right, chapter 15 is a big, big deal. Huge deal on chapter 15. I call it the fence chapter because, like, the first is like sitting on a fence. You got one foot on one side, one foot on the other. And the first part is like the old world of Boo Radley and the children's world, and the foot on the other side is the trial and kind of what's going on in the adult world. And in this chapter, we get kind of pushed all the way over to the other side. This is an intense, crazy chapter. Make sure you listen to um, the discussion that me and Mitzi did, or that Mitzi and I did, also posted. Do that after you read this chapter because it's really, really good. All right. End of 14, we ended with Dill running away because his parents didn't need him, didn't want him. He wasn't any use to them. You got a Boo Radley reference there, too, with, maybe Boo Radley hasn't run away because he doesn't have anywhere to run off to. So here we are, chapter 15. After many telephone calls, much pleading on behalf of the defendant, and a long forgiving letter from his mother, it was decided that Dill could stay. We had a week of peace together. After that, little it seemed, a nightmare was upon us. Pause. I'm not going to do this the whole time, but we got to pause here. This is that technique that Harper Lee uses. She tells you how it's going to end before it starts. So Dill's there. It was peaceful for a little while, and then it wasn't. And then there was a nightmare. Like they were living a nightmare. And this is how it all starts. It all began one evening after supper. Dill was over, and Alexander was in her chair in the corner. Atticus was in his. Jem and I were on the floor reading. It had been a placid week. I had minded Auntie. Jem had outgrown the treehouse, but helped Dill and me construct a new rope ladder for it. Dill had hit upon a foolproof plan to make Boo Radley come out at no cost to ourselves. Place a trail of lemon drops from the back door to the front yard, and he would follow it like an ant. There was a knock on the front door. Jem answered it and said it was Mr. Heck Tate. Well, ask him to come in, said Atticus. Already did. There's some men outside in the yard. They want you to come out. In Macomb, grown men stood outside in the front yard for only two reasons: death and politics. I wondered who had died. Jem and I went to the front door, but Atticus called, "Go back in the house." Jem turned out the living room lights and pressed his nose to the window screen. Why did Jem do that? Turns off the lights inside the house? Yes, you're right. It's easier to see outside when the lights are off, right? Anne Alexander protested. Just for a second, Auntie, let's see who it is, he said. Dill and I took another window. A crowd of men was standing around Atticus. They all seemed to be talking at once. Moving him to the county jail tomorrow, Mr. Tate was saying. I don't look for any trouble, but I can't guarantee there won't be any. Don't be foolish, Heck, Atticus said. This is Macomb. I just said I was uneasy. Heck, we've gotten a postponement of this case just to make sure there's nothing to be uneasy about. This is Saturday, Atticus said. Trial will probably be Monday. You can keep him one night, can't you? I don't think anybody in Macomb will begrudge me a client with times this hard. Pause. They're talking about Tom Robinson. They're moving him to the county jail. So he's out of town, and they're moving him into the local jail on Sunday, and the trial starts on Monday the next day. And Heck says, I'm not so sure. I don't know if I can keep him. Just uneasy, right? When you have a black man accused of raping a white woman in Alabama, this is reason for lynching. This is reason to kill him. And so that's what they're talking about. They're afraid for Tom Robinson's life if he is moved here, even if it's just one night that he has to stay in that jail. There was a murmur of glee that died suddenly when Mr. Linkd said, Nobody around here is up to anything. It's that old Sarum bunch I'm worried about. Can't you get what is it, Heck? Change of venue, said Mr. Tate. That means they'll change of location. Okay. Sometimes they'll do that. They'll move trials to different areas in the same state just because they feel like they can't get a fair trial where they are. Change of venue, said Mr. Tate. Not much point in that now, is it? Atticus said something inaudible. I turned to Jem, who waved me to silence. Besides, Atticus was saying, you're not scared of that crowd, are you? You know how they do when they get shinnied up. They don't usually drink on Sunday. They go to church most of the day, Atticus said. This is a special occasion, though, someone said. So they're talking about this group at Old Sarum, this group in this county that would be likely to do something. And the guy's like, when they get drunk, man, you don't know what they're capable of doing. And Atticus is like, it's Sunday. They don't usually drink on Sundays. This is a special occasion, though, someone said. They murmured and buzzed until Auntie said if Jem didn't turn on the living room lights, he would disgrace the family. Jem didn't hear her. I don't see why you touched it in the first place, Mr. Linktease was saying. You've got everything to lose from this, Atticus. I mean everything. Okay, pause. Linktease is Tom Robinson's boss. If you didn't know that, that's important. And he looks at Atticus and he says, Atticus, I don't know why you took this case. You're a white dude and you are defending a black man who is accused of raping a white woman. This has got bad written all over it. You've got everything to lose. Your job, your reputation. You are even putting your life on the line, let alone probably risking your family's life too. This is all kinds of bad. Atticus responds, do you really think so? This was Atticus's dangerous question. Do you really think you want to move there, Scout? Bam, bam, bam. The checkerboard would be swept clean of my men. Do you really think that, son? Then read this. Jem would struggle the rest of an evening through the speeches of Henry Grady. Link, that boy might go to the chair, but he's not going until the truth is told. Atticus's voice was even, and you know what the truth is. Pause. That boy might go to the chair, the electric chair. Rape is a capital crime, meaning if Tom Robinson is convicted, he will face the death penalty. Period. No discussion. There was a murmur among the group of men made more ominous. 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 There was a murmur among the group of men made more ominous when Atticus moved back to the bottom front step and the men drew nearer to him. Suddenly, Jem screamed, Atticus! Telephone's ringing! The men jumped a little and scattered. They were people we saw every day. Merchants, in-town farmers. Dr. Reynolds was there. So was Mr. Avery. Well, answer it, son, called Atticus. Laughter broke them up. When Atticus switched on the overhead light in the living room, he found Jem at the window, pale except for the vivid mark of the screen on his nose. Why on earth are you all sitting in the dark? He asked. Jem watched him go to his chair and pick up the evening paper. I sometimes think Atticus subjected every crisis of his life to tranquil evaluation behind the mobile register, the Birmingham News and the Montgomery Advertiser. They were after you, weren't they? Jem went to him. They wanted to get you, didn't they? Notice Jem immediately is alerted. Scott doesn't get it. Dill doesn't get it. But Jem is like, something's going on. Like, this Tom Robinson case is bad. Like, they were after you. Atticus lowered the paper and gazed at Jem. What have you been reading? He asked. Then he said gently, No, son, those were our friends. It wasn't a gang? Jem was looking from the corner of his eyes. Atticus tried to stifle a smile but didn't make it. No, we don't have mobs and that nonsense in Macomb. I've never heard of a gang in Macomb. Ku Klux got after some Catholics one time. I never heard of any Catholics in Macomb either, said Atticus. You're confusing that with something else. Way back about 1920, there was a Klan, but it was a political organization more than anything. Besides, they couldn't find anybody to scare. They paraded by Mr. Sam Levy's house one night, but Sam just stood on his porch and told them things had come to a pretty pass. He told them the very sheets on their backs. Sam made them so ashamed of themselves they went away. The Levy family met all the criteria for being fine folks. They did the best they could with the sense they had, and they had been living on the same plot of ground in Macomb for 5 generations. The Ku Klux is gone, said Atticus. It'll never come back. Wouldn't that be nice? I walked home with Dill and returned in time to overhear Atticus saying to Auntie, in favor of Southern womanhood as much as anybody, but not for preserving polite fiction at the expense of human life. A pronouncement that made me suspect they had been fussing again. I sought Jem and found him in his room, on the bed, deep in thought. Have they been at it? I asked. Sort of. She won't let him alone about Tom Robinson. She almost said Atticus was disgracing the family. Scout? I'm scared. Scared of what? Scared about Atticus? Somebody might hurt him. Jem preferred to remain mysterious. All he would say to my questions was to go on and leave him alone. Next Sunday, in the interval between Sunday school and church when the congregation stretched its legs, I saw Atticus standing in the yard with another knot of men. Mr. Hectate was present, and I wondered if he had seen the light. He never went to church. Even Mr. Underwood was there. Mr. Underwood had no use for any organization but the Macomb Tribune, of which he was the sole owner, editor, and printer. His days were spent in his linotype, where he refreshed himself occasionally from an ever-present gallon jug of cherry wine. He rarely gathered the news. People brought it to him. It was said that he made up every edition of the Macomb Tribune out of his own head and wrote it down on the linotype. This was believable. Something must have been up to haul Mr. Underwood out. I caught Atticus coming in the door, and he said that they'd moved Tom Robinson to the Macomb jail. He also said more to himself than to me, that if they'd kept him there in the first place, there wouldn't have been any fuss. I watched him take his seat on the third row from the front, and I heard him rumble, "Nearer, my God, to thee," some notes behind the rest of us. He never sat with Auntie Jem and me. He liked to be by himself in church. I like that little line right there. You always get these little nuggets of wisdom from Atticus about life, and that's why I call it my Bible, because it's like how to live. And when he never sat with Auntie Jem and me at church, he liked to be by himself. That is, simply a statement that like church is personal, right? Religion is personal. It's not about the group thing. It's not about that. It's a personal relationship, as Atticus has made that clear. This is Sunday, right, after church. The fake peace that prevailed on Sundays was made more irritating by Aunt Alexandra's presence. Atticus would flee to his office directly after dinner, where, if we sometimes looked in on him, we would find him sitting back in his swivel chair reading. Aunt Alexandra composed herself for a 2-hour nap and dared us to make any noise in the yard. The neighborhood was resting. Jem, in his old age, has taken to his room with a stack of football magazines, so Dill and I spent our Sundays creeping around in Dill's pasture. Shooting on Sundays was prohibited, so Dill and I kicked Jem's football around the pasture for a while, which was no fun. Dill asked if I'd like to have a poke at Boo Radley. I said I didn't think it'd be nice to bother him, and spent the rest of the afternoon filling Dill in on last winter's events. He was considerably impressed. What was last winter's events? The blanket, remember? We parted at supper time, and after our meal, Jem and I were settling down to a routine evening when Atticus did something that interested us. He came into the living room carrying a long electrical extension cord. There was a light bulb on one end. "Going out for a while," he said. "You folks will be in bed when I come back, so I'll say good night right now." With that, he put his hat on and went out the back door. "He's taken the car," said Jem. Our father had a few peculiarities. One was he never ate desserts. That's a little pearl of wisdom for you there. Another was that he liked to walk. As far back as I could remember, there was always a Chevrolet in excellent condition in the garage, and Atticus put many miles on it in business trips, but in Macomb, he walked to and from his office 4 times a day, covering about 2 miles. He said his only exercise was walking. In Macomb, if one went for a walk with no definite purpose in mind, it was correct to believe one's mind incapable of definite purpose. Later on, I bade my aunt and brother good night and was well into a book when I heard Jem rattling around in his room. His go-to-bed noises were so familiar to me that I knocked on his door. "Why ain't you going to bed?" "Going downtown for a while." He was changing his pants. "Well, it's almost 10 o'clock, Jem." He knew it, but he was going anyway. "Then I'm going with you. If you say no, you're not, I'm going anyway, you hear?" Jem saw that he'd have to fight me to keep me home, and I suppose he thought a fight would antagonize Auntie, so he gave in with little grace. I dressed quickly. We waited until Auntie's light went out, and we walked quietly down the back steps. There was no moon tonight. "Dill'll want to come," I whispered. "So he will," said Jem gloomily. We leaped over the driveway wall, cut through Miss Rachel's side yard, and went to Dill's window. Jem whistled Bob White. Dill's face appeared at the screen and disappeared 5 minutes later. He unhooked the screen and crawled out. An old campaigner, he did not speak until we were on the sidewalk. "What's up?" Dill said. "Jem's got the look-arounds," an affliction Calpurnia said all boys caught at his age. "I've just got this feeling," Jem said, "just this feeling." We went by Mrs. DeBose's house, standing empty and shuttered. Her camellias grown up in weeds and Johnson grass. There were 8 more houses to the post office corner. The south side of the square was deserted. Giant monkey puzzle bushes bristled on each corner, and between them an iron hitching rail glistened under the streetlights. A light shone in the county toilet, otherwise that side of the courthouse was dark. A larger square of stores surrounded the courthouse square. Dim lights burned from deep within them. Atticus's office was in the courthouse when he began his law practice, but after several years of it, he moved to quieter quarters in the Macon Bank building. When we rounded the corner of the square, we saw the car parked in front of the bank. "He's in there," said Jim. But he wasn't. His office was reached by a long hallway. Looking down the hallway, we should have seen Atticus Finch, attorney at law, in small, sober letters against the light from behind the door. But his office was dark. Jem peered in the bank door to make sure. He turned the knob. The door was locked. "Let's go up the street. Maybe he's visiting Mr. Underwood." Mr. Underwood not only ran the Macon Tribune office, he lived in it. That is, above it. He covered the courthouse and jailhouse news simply by looking out his upstairs window. The bank office building was on the northwest corner of the square, and to reach it, you had to pass the jail. The Macon jail was the most venerable and hideous of the county's buildings. Atticus said it was like something cousin Joshua St. Clair might have designed. It was certainly someone's dream. Starkly out of place in a town of square-faced stores and steep-roofed houses, the Macon jail was a miniature Gothic joke, 1 cell wide and 2 cells high, complete with tiny battlements and flying buttresses. Its fantasy was heightened by its red brick facade and thick steel bars at its ecclesiastical windows. It stood on no lonely hill, but was wedged between Tyndall's hardware store and the Macon Tribune office. The jail was Macon's only conversation piece. Its detractors said it looked like a Victorian privy. Its supporters said it gave the town a good, solid, respectable look, and no stranger would ever suspect that it was full of black folks. Minor criminals, nothing big. As we walked up the sidewalk, we saw a solitary light burning in the distance. "That's funny," said Jem. "Jail doesn't have an outside light." "Looks like it's over the door," said Dill. A long extension cord ran between the bars of a second-floor window and down the side of the building. Remember what Atticus had when he was leaving? A long extension cord. In the light bulb from its bare bulb, Atticus was sitting propped up against the front door. He was sitting in one of his office chairs, and he was reading, oblivious of the night bugs dancing over his head. I made to run, but Jem caught me. "Don't go to him," he said. "He might not like it. He's all right. Let's go home." I just wanted to see where he was. We were taking a shortcut